G'day, welcome to Payitforward. Today I'm sharing with you a little assemblage art project that I made to go with my new masterclass that has also just launched today, and it is a beautiful little assemblage dog to go with my robot. So this is a little sewing style assemblage dog. He is just the cutest thing ever. Now you don't actually need a pattern for this one. This is more of a watch as I go along tutorial where you see how I put it all together, because of course this is all made up using found items and vintage items and all sorts of bits and pieces. This one is really going to spark your creativity. I certainly hope it does. I hope to see many of these in the future, and I'll share a lot more of this sort of artwork with you. But he is just super cute, as you'll see in the video. Made up with, and we've got some decoupage there, we've got some finding found items and putting them all together in a way that is super simple and pleasing. So let's jump in and you can watch me as I work through this process to make this sweet little man. So let me show you here what we're going to need to put together basically what we call assemblage art, this little dog. And of course it doesn't have to be a dog, you can make assemblage art into anything at all. Assemblage art basically is using found objects. So using found objects, objects that are just around the house, perhaps in your workshop, in your shed, and reusing them in a way that they weren't intended for. So it's a very artistic endeavour. So what I'm going to show you is what I'm doing, and hopefully it gives you a basic guideline of what you can do, because obviously you're going to be using different found objects than me, but there are a few little tips and techniques that can help you along the way, and certainly with your product. So I'm making a little robot dog to go with Bobbin, my beautiful robot. And I'm going to start with a body piece. So now I want my robot dog to be quite blocky and to be very structured, but he's also a little sewing robot dog. So I want to bring in some of those little embellishments and so on to make that happen. So I'm starting with a piece of, this is just a little craft block of wood bought from my hardware store. I bought it in a pack of all sorts of different sizes. It's super, super light and it's very easy to sand back and paint. This one is about 6 centimeters by about 3.5. So it's a good shape for the body and it's a good little size to work with. So that's what I have for my body. On that body, I'm going to be adding, first of all, I'm going to be painting it. And I'm using acrylic paints for that. So I'm using my Jo Sonja's acrylic paints in my appropriate colours. I'll also be adding some metallic gold to give that sort of metal sort of a look. Lots of techniques to show you. So we've got our acrylic paints to paint it. And then we're going to be adding, well, I'm going to be adding a few pieces of scrapbooking papers with old sewing images. So I'm going to be cutting some pieces up. I'm going to be decoupaging that in a really antique sort of looking way. You can see there I've got some beautiful little pictures, different sewing scenes and spools of thread and so on that I'm going to cover this little block with. And I'll be using my PVA glue to be gluing those papers on, and I'll be using Mod Podge to finish it off as a decoupage. Now, a lot of people use Mod Podge for their glue, to glue their papers on with this sort of work. I always use PVA to glue the papers on. It is a wood glue, so I think it's actually better and your project is sealed better if you use PVA glue first. That's just my opinion, but then you just use your Mod Podge for that lovely gloss top. So that's our body spoken for. You can also add to that body, as I will, all sorts of things, mechanical things like little cogs. Pick these up on eBay in lots of little bags, and I will be adding a couple of those to make him look very mechanical. all sorts of bits and pieces you can add. You're only limited by your imagination with this one. I do have some very old, this is an old sewing tape, measuring tape. Lovely vintage look to it and colour. I'll be using a couple of pieces of that to go on there as well. You could use brass buttons, all that sort of thing, just to give that, like I said, that really structured metallic look. So that's basically it for the body. Now to add to the body, of course, we're going to have some legs. So my legs for this one, because he's a little sewing fellow, he's going to have little bobbins to go with my beautiful robot bobbin, and I am using just 35mm bolts, so the same bolts I use in my jointing, but these are 35mm. They're the perfect length to go ahead and pop through. You can see I've just used a normal bobbin and I've popped the bolt through and glued it to the base, and then I've got that gorgeous little bobbin. I've also filled my bobbins and sealed them with some heavy gel medium. You could use your Mod Podge for this too. I just paint over those threads because it gives them a little bit of shine. It really enhances the colour, and it stops any of that thread from coming up and unwinding. So to go with my project, I've got 2 back feet with the green and then a red and a yellow for the front, and it's really lovely. You don't have to add anything to the bobbin, but it's lovely to see a bit of colour. If you don't want to add cotton or thread to it, you can also wrap strips of fabric around that, and that can bring some colour in as well. So those are his little legs, and he's going to sit obviously on top of those little legs. So we'll be making drill holes for those to go into. Now, if you don't want to use the bolts, or perhaps you don't have them at hand, you can get yourself some covered rope wire. Perhaps you have that lying around or something similar. You can cut those. I've got mine cut to 4 centimetres each. Could definitely use those. They're the same sort of size as the bolt. Another alternative, I'm just trying to show you plenty of alternatives. You could use just your wooden craft sticks, which will go straight down the centre of the bobbin. You may not want to use bobbins for the feet. You might want to use thimbles. Thimbles would make great feet. You can just punch a hole through the top, and then you can add whatever leg technique you're going to use. But these are definitely worth a thought, those wooden sticks, and of course you can paint them to any colour you like. You could even paint them to be metallic. So that's my legs spoken for. And the older they are, the better when you're working with this sort of thing, but you can always spray paint them and so on. Now, next we're going to need a head. So for the head, I have a whole container of vintage cotton spools. This one is absolutely gorgeous. It's very, very old, and it's still got some of the original papers on it. That's exactly what I want. The size, let me give you an idea of the size. Again, you won't have something exactly the same. So this one's about 3.5 long, and diameter is about 30 millimeters. So the head we're adding at the front like this, so it's going lengthways. You wouldn't add it like this because it won't look like an animal. So we're going to do it this way. And the way that we're going to do that, we do need a piece of wire of some description that we can create that little right angle curve so that we can pop that into the end, drill a hole in the top once we've completed the body block, and we're going to drop that in, and it's going to sit straight down. We don't even have to glue it in if you want the little head to be poseable. So I will probably leave mine that it just slots in, because mine is a collectible. It's not for playing with, so you can certainly secure it with the head on a nice angle. So for adding features, remember we need to keep it all as assemblage art. So we're not getting too clever here. We want to make it needs to look like it's just a whole load of junk pieces all put together in a bit of a clever way. So for the ears, for mine, I'm going to be adding 2 little eye screws, little brass eye screws at the top there, and they're going to make just the cutest little ears poking up. And I will be screwing those straight into that wooden spool. That's why it's handy having a wooden spool for the head. So we'll have the little ears there like that. I will be adding just a black eye, a safety eye at the end, because there's a perfect opportunity there with that hole. I'll be gluing that in, and that's for his nose. So he's a bit of an Airedale looking dog, this one, with his long muzzle. So then we're going to need some kind of eyes, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky and you've got to be a little bit creative. So what I've done is I've taken 2 of the little nuts that I use for my jointing, and I've glued them together on one of those edges. The glue I'm using is the epoxy araldite, so you need the strongest epoxy glue. I've glued them together because they're going to sit right here. They're going to be glued actually to that little spool, and the ears will sit behind. In the center of those, you can add whatever works for you. I've got little black glass eyes, and I'm going to drop them in and glue those into place. You could alternatively, if you've got the beads that will fit, a couple of little black beads will do it. Remember, keep it all really simple. Don't start trying to get realistic on this, or you'll completely defeat the purpose of the whole project, looking like assemblage art. So that's his little eyes, he's got his ears and his nose, nice and simple. When it's joined to the body, I will be adding a little D-ring around his neck as I do it, and I will add, I've got a little dog bone charm that will hang from his collar. That's nicely metal, that will be super cute. I'll also be adding on mine, to match my robot, a little red heart, and that will be the pop of colour on the left side of his chest. That will be gorgeous. And what else do we need? Really, it's just about your embellishments and how you want to decorate it. No, he needs a tail. So his tail is going to be a hat pin, keeping with that sewing vibe. And I've got a little bead, a little cover bead that will go on first. And that will sit up there. I'll glue that in place. Just another little detail. And to add it to the body, I've got another little bell covered bead that'll go on the back, and the little tail will sit in there. So we're going to have a lovely little jaunty little tail. So what we start with, let me move everything out the way. I think you understand now that it's all about finding your own special little pieces. But if you stay with those basic pieces to start with, you're well on the way. So first up, I've painted my block. So I've got 2 of these. This was it before. I first sanded it off with some sandpaper, made sure everything is nice and smooth. I've gone ahead and just gone with 1 coat of the very bright green that my robot is. I then will be covering most of this with my scrapbooking papers, and I will be adding some beautiful gold paint brushed on all of the edges, and that will antique it up. So we do all of this work first before we drill any holes to assemble our little dog. So let's get started with doing some of these scrapbooking papers. So you'll need your PVA glue, whatever pictures and details you're going to add to that little block, and a nice soft brush. You can use a foam brush or just a soft brush. I tend to just use a filament brush like this one, and that will be for adding my pictures. So let's move forward and do that. Okay, so let's get started on preparing the little body block. Now I've chosen quite a few different little pieces and I've cut them out. My scrapbooking, remember mine is sewing themed, So I've got some beautiful little images there. Now, if you just cut your piece out and stick it on like that, you won't get that lovely vintage look. So see what I've done there around the edge. Let me show you how to do that. You want to age them slightly. Super easy to do. So this is a piece cut out. You can see there, no aging on the edges. If you take just one of your alcohol markers in a nice vintage brown or even a dirty chrome green, any of those grungy sort of colours, just take the broad end and go around the edge. So we're just tipping the edge, taking off that white core. It's not a perfect art, this here. In fact, we want it to be quite indiscriminate and quite random. But you want to really colour up that edge. And then you're going to take your colourless blender in your alcohol markers. And you want to go ahead and blend that out. And don't be afraid to really take it on and colour up anywhere that you made a mark. Blend that out to give it that really aged vintage sort of a look. It makes such a difference. Is it worth doing this? Absolutely, it's worth doing this. It's all these little things that make all the difference, especially in assemblage art, because if you're doing assemblage art, it's nearly always vintage in style. You want it to look old, junkyardy. You can make a beautiful little junkyard dog this way. Now that, just to show you the difference, so this is a piece that is cut clean with no aging, and this is your piece that has the aging done. Makes such a difference when you add it to your project. So what you have to do first of all is work out a layout. So text also looks really good on any of these decoupage sort of projects. Let me bring that up a little closer. There we go. So hopefully that gives you a better look. So I need to cover the front, the back, the top and the two sides, not the underneath, because that's where the legs are going in and it won't be seen. So you can see there that I've created two little images there. I've got a spool that I've fussy cut. I've got the little sewing machine and the word machines. Now I still need to vintage the edges of these two, but that's my one side. Get your phone and take a photo of your layout so you don't forget. So I'm just going to pop that one aside. You can see I've got silicone paper down here too that I'm working on. Let me show you the opposite side. This is the side that for me will be shown mostly in my photographs. I've got a nice little cutout again, old sewing fashion shot, another spool, some text, stop winding bobbins, and then at the front there, when it's all done, I'm going to add that little cog. Beautifully vintage looking there, bringing in those metals as well. So that's the opposite side. Put that one aside. For the back, I've got just that beautiful image there again with a little sewing machine, been aged, and I've cut it. You'll notice too that all of my images don't go right to the edge. Cut them so that there's space around, because we want to be able to do some beautiful gold gilding on the edges there of that body. So we need room to do that. So that's the back. The top, I'm just putting this beautiful piece, little sewing machine, some lovely text. That's going to sit right in the middle because I'm going to be drilling a hole for the head there, drilling a hole for the tail there. So I really don't want to be drilling through my images. So that's for the top. And then at the front, remember I wanted to add some of that vintage tape measure. That's going to be at the very front. I've got one red little heart button ready to go, and then I'm going to add, I've got a tiny kitten, tiny little vintage kitten picture, and I've even antiqued the edge of that one. So that will sit in nicely just there. So as I said, take a photograph of your layouts that you've chosen so that you don't get them mixed up. Buttons will be glued on last, little cogs will be glued on last, but for now we're going to do our first gluing. Now remember, I told you I don't use Mod Podge for actually gluing the images on. I use my PVA glue. I'm just going to put a small amount of that just on an extra piece of paper here, so it's easy for me to get to. Move all these out the way. I've got my brush ready, and I'm simply going to start with this one. So this is my first lot. Just liberally apply that to the back. PVA glue dries clear, so you don't have to worry if there's any crazy excess. But I do have on hand ready a nice damp cloth, just to wipe that down if it all gets a bit too messy. Make sure you get right to your edges. And that one I know is going right in the centre. Press that one into place. You can use a squeegee if you have one. I do have one. I didn't pull that out. I will. And you want that really beautifully pressed down. Once you've done that, I'm going to add my next piece, which will be my little spool. We get everything glued into place, we let it dry, and then we go over the whole thing with our Mod Podge. So I've got a little space here. Actually going to flip that one. No, I'm not. I tell a lie. There. I sit that right on that edge. There's my little spool. Very important that your edges are all pushed down. And then I'm going to add my stop winding bobbin. So I was pretty excited to find that piece. Especially given that my robot's name is Bobbin. And I've even antiqued the edge of this one. Just going to let that be slightly on an angle. You don't want everything straight. You want it to be random. So once I'm all done and I add that little cog there at the front, that will look absolutely gorgeous. So now I'm going to reverse it. I can press that all down, and I'm going to add my other pieces where I've already planned them out, set that aside and let that dry. I'll show you what it looks like when I've got them all glued on. So that has all of my little scrapbooking pieces all done. Little red heart will be here at the front, adding that one at the side when we're all done, and probably a button around the other side. But now that they're all glued and they're super flat, made absolutely certain they're beautifully flat, you can now set that aside to dry. And that's the important part. You've got to let that dry completely. If you just start going in with your Mod Podge now, before that's properly dry, the whole lot is going to lift off in the end. It's very, very important that you let it dry absolutely completely. So I'm back now and all of my little pieces are dry. Before we go ahead and add Mod Podge to this, we're going to just do a little bit of highlighting on all the edges, and you'll see that it makes a huge difference to the finished effect. Remembering that mine is a little robot dog, I'm going to be going for that really metal look. So I've got on my white palette here. I always use a white palette. This is just an old china plate. Always mix your colours on white because it gives you the truest colour. I've got a metallic copper bronze and I've got a beautiful rich gold. Some water here, and I'm using a large stippling brush, flat on the end. I'm going to start with my copper colour and I'm going to load up my brush well. Just a tiny bit of water in there, in that mix, and really load it up. Then I'm going to absolutely blot it off on my cloth here. I'm going to remove most of that colour. I'll reapply and then really blot it off on my cloth here till there's hardly any there. Because what I want to do now is go ahead and just lightly brush all the edges. So you can be as light or as heavy-handed as you like with this, but just where the light would naturally catch it, I'm adding that highlight. And that lovely copper bronze is working really well with my colours. And it's just breaking up that green. Now if you hardly have any paint on your brush, you'll see that as you just go across that wood, it's only going to pick up some of it. It gives you that lovely distressed look. So I'm coating every visible edge. Make sure you get all of those corners. The corners are the best bits. Base doesn't matter too much. We don't see much of that. And you can see there's plenty of paint still on my brush. The last thing you want is a heavily loaded brush. The corners, I like to add a little more. So now it's broken up that colour of the green, made it a lot more subtle, but we've still got that lovely pop of green coming through. If we hadn't painted it, we wouldn't have that beautiful contrast. Absolutely makes all the difference. Get some more paint on my brush. I'm just lightly dragging it across. Anywhere you've got texture, if you just take that brush across, you can see those lines there. The paint's only going to pick up on those lines. And I think you'll agree it's changed up the whole look. You can have your hairdryer, blow dryer ready waiting if you like, and you can give that a blast of heat just to set that. And then go ahead, I'm going to wash my brush completely, and then I'm going to do the same thing, only this time with the gold. Just add an absolute highlight of gold, that beautiful rich gold. And do exactly the same thing. Blot off again, so I don't have too much on there. And again, just hitting those corners. Not covering all of that copper, just a few highlights here and there along the edges. That gold just adds that second metallic colour. Again, as much or as little as you like. Then I'm going to let that dry. Doesn't take too long. Then I'm going to get my Mod Podge and apply 2 even coats. I won't show you that. I'm pretty sure everybody knows how to apply your Mod Podge. Just remember, nice even strokes with a lovely soft brush. So I'm pretty happy with that. You can see the difference. It's just gorgeous. So then I'm going to take my soft brush, this one here, once that's dry, lovely soft filament brush. I'm using just your original Mod Podge. I'm using the one that is for paper and wood. Make sure you shake it up well and make sure that you work quickly with Mod Podge. Apply it in nice even strokes. It goes on white, it dries clear, but you do want to make sure you haven't got any lumps and bumps in it. Make sure it's nice and soft. You can cover the base and then you can sit it on silicone paper to dry on the base, because the base isn't going to be seen. That's where we're adding the legs. So I will add 2 coats. When you're going over all of these paper areas, make sure you get right in around those paper area edges as well, so they're fully sealed. So now while we're waiting for that body to dry with that Mod Podge, we can go ahead and start working on the head section. So I have used just my Mod Podge 2 coats on my lovely vintage cotton reel. I haven't done anything to it because I wanted to keep all of those beautiful stains and colours that are in the wood, and I've coated all of the paper pieces as well, so that's all preserved. You could use that brush on technique of metallic paint on the edges of this as well if you like, but mine, because it's a little sewing robot, I want to preserve the idea that that is a beautiful vintage cotton reel. So I've just kept it plain. Now our next step here, the glue that I'm using is, I'm using Araldite 5 minute, so super strong epoxy, and it dries quickly, so that's the best glue for this job. I'm going to be taking my little right angled piece of wire. Now this is wire rope and it's plastic coated. You can get it not plastic coated. You might be able to use a piece of simple wire. You might have something that is this shape that will sit in like this, and then you're going to be able to add that to your little dog. So you just want, I can give you a measurement here. I'm allowing about 2.5 centimetres to go into my spool. So that's plenty of room to glue it in, and it's going to be nice and secure. And I think it's around about 4. So the neck situation is about 4. I'm not going to have him with a long neck, of course. It's going to be embedded down into my little body wood block, and so it will sit down like this. So what I need to do now is glue that one into place, which I will do. I'm also going to glue the nose into place, whatever you're using for the nose, I'll glue that there. And then I'm doing the tail with a hat pin with that little bead cover that I showed you. I'm going to be gluing that one into place with the same glue. And I have the 2 little eyes, they're already glued up nicely, and I'm going to add in my 2 black glass eyes. You might be adding a little bead, and I'll do that. Everything's sticking at the moment, there we go. And that is going to sit, they will sit up here. Right up here, just in front of those beautiful screw-in ears. So I'm going to get everything glued up and done, so all of our parts are ready. I've already glued the bolts onto my bobbin pieces, and I've got nothing else to put together. Get that all glued up, we'll come back and start assembling him. Okay, so now just showing you that I've glued in that little right angled piece of wire into the back of that cotton spool there, so that's all ready to go. His little nose is in place, and then I've just taken, because I'm using the little eye pins for the ears, I've taken my hand drill. So I've got a little tiny hand drill that's got all sorts of, these are really handy for this sort of work, by the way. super cheap to buy on Amazon, and they give you total control when you're working on little things like this. So I've made those 2 little drill holes straight through that spool and then just wound those in. I've got them turned out nicely. So that's his cute little head, and now I'm going to go ahead and glue with that same Araldite epoxy glue. I'm going to drop those eyes in place right on top there. See if I can show you how that's going to look. And he will have a cute little, very robot look there with those little eyes. So a really great glue is your best friend when you're working with this sort of thing, but do keep your glue residue to a minimum. You really want to make sure that you do good cleanup when you're adding it. So I'm going to add those eyes. I've got my tail already. I am going to add a couple of springs if I can on top of that one. I've glued that one in place. And of course all of my bobbins are all glued and ready, and we're just going to, I'm going to get those eyes glued into place, then we're going to put this one together. So here we go, we've got our little body block all done and dried, and we've got the head finished. Look at that cute little face. Keep it simple. That's what makes this work. The fact that it all looks terribly, terribly simple. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I have drilled a hole in the front of my block here that is large enough to accommodate my wire. But with me, I'm just going to be dropping that in there, and I'm not going to glue it in because I want to be able to pose that head. So that's definitely an option. Otherwise, consider, if you're going to have to glue it in, consider gluing it in on an angle rather than straight ahead, because then you really limit your posability. So just make sure, if you're putting it with an art doll or something like that, that you make sure you know which side it's going to be on, so determine which way the head is going to turn. So, but before I add that head, I've made up a little D-ring with a loop and my tiny little dog bone charm, and that will slip on there first, and then I will drop the neck in. That can be done last because it's not glued in. My next thing that I've done is I've drilled a tiny little hole using my tiny little hand drill. I've drilled a hole in the base there, and that is for the tail. And I'm also adding, on the base of the tail, I'm adding another one of those little cup beads that will be glued straight in there and sit straight up out of that little cup shape there. And then once it's fully cured with the glue, I can always bend that tail back just a little. Remember that this is a hat pin. So really it's just about making all of your appropriate drill holes now to add your pieces. So on the base, I've added my drill holes ready to add those legs. Now the legs are those bolts, and I've made the holes just small enough that I can wind those in. I will glue them in, so what I'll do is I'll drop some of that Araldite glue in there first with a skewer, and then I'll wind these in. When you're making these marks, I can't give you a measurement obviously because your wood block will be a different size to mine. When you're making these measurements, just make sure, if you're adding a leg that has like the bobbins on the end, you want to make sure they're far enough apart that there's still a tiny space. So I'm going to wind that down just a little way and then test the second one. So I've got my red and yellow feet on the front, and I can wind that down to exactly the same height. So he'll stand up nice and straight. Check that. Makes it really easy when you're working with the bolts that you can do this. So there we can see those little legs the right height, and also they're not quite touching. So when he's standing up, they look like proper little feet. So I'm going to get those glued in, the back ones glued in as well, making sure they're nice and level, and the tail glued into place. I'm then going to add those final little features at the same time. So I'm going to add the little heart at the front, which you can see really makes that pop. And also I'm adding the cogs here and there, and perhaps a button on the other side. So let me get that all glued up into place, put him together, and we'll give you the big reveal. So is this not the cutest little robot dog ever? They are so fun to make. I can't even tell you. Discovering little bits and pieces to help put them together is the best part. So I've used a spring from inside a pen to go over that the pin, the hat pin, and that's given it another little bit of detail. You can see how well the bobbins go. Imagine using thimbles for the feet, and it's really worth doing that work with the decoupage first. It just makes such a difference. And do consider making that head posable, because look at that, it brings a whole new look to it. But keep it simple, folks, really keep it simple. That's the whole idea of this concept. I know that we're going to see some incredible creations come out of this one. I'm giving this little guy a lead, a chain lead, so he's going to be chained by his collar to my beautiful robot bobbins hand, and he's going to make the best companion. But these are fun to make just on their own, so I really hope you like him too. So thank you all for joining me and seeing little Spoolie get put together. Here he is with his beautiful robot friend Bobbin. I hope that you learned some new tips and tricks along the way, and maybe it just ignited a little bit of inspiration to create in this sort of a way, because sewing is great. But if you're like me, I really love mixed media, and it's even better when you combine the two of them together. So I hope this has given you a whole heap of ideas. I hope you all stay safe, have a fantastic creative week, and remember to pay all those good things forward. Until next time, it is hooroo from me.